The snow had begun to fall over London as if the heavens themselves wished to cleanse the city of its sins. The ballroom of Lord Hensley's manor glowed with gold and candlelight, chandeliers trembling slightly from the draught each time the great doors opened to admit another guest. Laughter rose and fell like music, polished, hollow, rehearsed. Beneath that brilliance she stood, the perfect image of grace and composure, her eyes calm as still water while her heart quietly fractured beneath layers of silk. For 5 years she had worn the mask of a devoted wife, her beauty used as a mirror in which her husband reflected his own pride. The whispers of their unhappy union were known but never spoken aloud. Society did not name cruelty, it dressed it in charm. And so tonight, when her husband turned to her before their assembled company and said, with a smile as sharp as a blade, "My wife finds comfort in silence. It spares her from saying anything foolish," the room laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but with that delicate laughter meant to show one's understanding of wit. Her cheeks did not flush, nor did her eyes falter. Only her hand, resting upon the edge of the banquet table, tightened slightly, the lace of her glove straining. The narrator, old, weary, almost fond, would have said, in that small gesture lay the weight of 5 years endured with dignity. Around her, the music swelled again. A waltz. The grand floor opened, couples spinning beneath the chandelier's glow. Her husband extended a gloved hand, not out of affection but formality. She took it, because refusal would invite pity and pity was worse than pain. As they moved through the dance, she caught sight of him, the stranger whose gaze had found her the moment she entered the room. The Duke of Ravensshire, recently returned from years abroad. His name alone carried the chill of mystery. There were whispers he had lost someone once, that grief had carved silence into his manner. He stood near the archway now, a man of solemn bearing and untamed sorrow. He did not smile when their eyes met. He merely inclined his head as if acknowledging something ancient between two souls who had never spoken. Her husband followed her gaze and stiffened, pulling her closer, his grip too tight, his voice low. "Do not invite his attention," he muttered through a practiced smile. "Men like him mistake compassion for conquest." She did not answer. What answer could there be? The orchestra's rhythm quickened. The Duke turned away, yet she felt his gaze still, like a steady flame behind the cold marble of society's face. When the dance ended, her husband released her hand too quickly. "Go amuse yourself, my dear," he said with feigned gentleness. "Perhaps you'll find conversation easier than grace." And with that, he walked away, toward the men who would praise his charm and toast his cruelty. The air in the ballroom seemed to thin. She smiled as the ladies approached, speaking of Paris, of ribbons, of anything that was not real. She answered with perfect politeness, each word carefully measured, though she heard, faintly, one of them whisper to another, "She looks pale." Perhaps the Duke's gaze unsettled her. She excused herself with a nod and walked toward the balcony. The air outside bit at her cheeks, crisp and silent, the snow falling in slow spirals. The city stretched before her like a painted dream, domes, rooftops, carriages drifting through fog. She breathed deeply, letting the cold steady her trembling hands. It was there, in the hush of snowfall, that she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, respectful. She turned, half expecting her husband. Instead, the Duke stood there, his dark coat dusted with snowflakes, his expression unreadable beneath the lantern glow. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice deep yet gentle. "I did not mean to intrude." "You did not," she replied softly, though her breath clouded the air between them. "There is little peace within those walls. The cold seems kinder." A faint smile touched his lips, though it never reached his eyes. "I have found the same to be true. Society burns so brightly, one forgets how near it stands to frost." She looked away, unable to bear the weight of being truly seen. "You speak as one who has stood at both fires," she said. He hesitated, as if caught between honesty and restraint. "I have," he admitted at last, "and learned that warmth given freely is the rarest gift of all." For a moment neither spoke. The snow fell thicker, dusting her shoulders, her hair, a quiet crown for a queen long forgotten by her court. He studied her with quiet sorrow, as though he saw the exhaustion behind her grace. "You should not linger here alone," he murmured finally. She turned toward the door. "No, perhaps not. People talk." "People always talk," he said almost to himself, "and they seldom speak of what matters." Their eyes met again, and something in her chest shifted, fragile but undeniable. There was no promise in his gaze, no impropriety, only recognition. As if two strangers had stumbled upon the same ruin and knew, without words, that they had both once lived there. A servant appeared at the doorway then, bowing awkwardly. "My lady, your carriage awaits." She nodded, stepping past the Duke, though she paused briefly beside him. "Good evening, your grace," she said, her tone perfectly measured. "Good evening," he replied, but there was warmth in the way he said it, a warmth that lingered even as she descended the marble steps, her gown brushing the snow. The narrator's voice returned, low and wistful, and thus began the first act of her deliverance, not with confession but with understanding. From the carriage window, she saw the Duke remain where she left him, standing beneath the lantern as the snow fell thicker around him. For a brief moment, she wondered what kind of man chose solitude in the midst of celebration, and whether he, too, bore the invisible scars of devotion unreturned. When she arrived home, the house was dark. Her husband had not yet returned. She removed her gloves, her earrings, the smile she had worn for hours. In the mirror, she saw only weariness staring back. Downstairs, the clock struck midnight. 5 years since she had married him. 5 years since she had felt the touch of kindness without suspicion. She drew the curtains, but her eyes lingered once more on the snow outside. It was still falling, soft, relentless, pure. In another part of the city, the Duke stood at his window looking toward the same snowfall, the same hour. His gloved hand rested upon the glass as he whispered, half to the night, half to memory, "Some wounds do not fade. They wait for recognition." And far away in her silent room, she whispered the same thought without knowing it. Recognition. The word hung between them across the city, fragile, forbidden, and alive. The narrator's final words for this night carried the weight of a beginning. In that cold December evening, under the polite cruelty of London's winter, two hearts long resigned to stillness began, quietly, to move once more. The snow had softened by morning, lying across the countryside like a quilt of silence. The grand city was far behind her now, its polished cruelty replaced by the muted calm of her husband's estate. Here, in the wide stretches of white and gray, she could at least breathe. The manor was vast but empty of warmth, its corridors filled with portraits of men who never smiled, their painted eyes following her as if guarding their legacy from her touch. Her husband had gone to London on business, leaving her behind with her thoughts and the bitter comfort of solitude. She sat near the parlor window, embroidery in hand, though the needle had not moved for some time. Outside, the frost traced delicate veins across the glass, catching light from the weak sun. The stillness was almost merciful, until a servant's hurried footsteps disturbed it. "Ma'am," the young maid said, holding a small parcel wrapped in ivory paper, the seal unmarked. "It was left by the gate. No name, only this." A flicker of curiosity, and unease, passed through her. Few ever wrote to her, and none dared do so without her husband's approval. She dismissed the maid, fingers hesitating only a moment before breaking the wax. Inside lay a folded handkerchief, fine linen embroidered with violet petals so delicate they seemed almost alive. Along the edge, in golden thread, a single line gleamed, "For what you did not deserve." She stared at the words, her breath catching faintly. It was both comfort and confession, and she knew instantly whose hands had shaped such grace. The Duke. Her first instinct was to hide it, yet her hand lingered on the fabric, tracing the thread as though it carried warmth. In this house of silences, kindness felt perilous, and she could not decide if the gesture was salvation or ruin. By evening, the servants were whispering. Even in the quiet countryside, secrets traveled faster than carriages. When her husband returned 2 nights later, his mood was sharp and restless. He had heard something, perhaps from the housekeeper or from one of those well-meaning gossips who thrived on half-truths. He found her in the drawing room, seated by the fire. "You've had company, I hear," he said, pouring himself a drink without meeting her eyes. She looked up calmly. "No one of note." He swirled the glass in his hand, his tone light. "Strange then. Someone was seen riding through our gate last morning. A dark horse, a fine coat, hardly a farmer's breed." "I would not know," she replied. He turned then, smiling faintly, a smile she had come to dread. "You never do." That night, as she lay awake, she tucked the embroidered handkerchief inside a book of poems, pressing it flat as though hiding a fragile secret. Yet even as she closed the pages, she knew the gesture had already begun to live its own life, beyond her control. Days passed. The Duke appeared again, this time under the pretense of delivering a document from Parliament. Something about land boundaries, nothing more. Her husband was away again, attending meetings in town, leaving her to play hostess. When the Duke entered, snow clinging to his coat, she felt that same quiet gravity as before, the strange pull of being seen without judgment. He bowed slightly. I trust you received my... Your courtesy, she interrupted, her voice low but steady. Yes, I did. And you must never send such a thing again. He studied her face. Why? Because kindness has no place in my house, she answered. The words hung between them like smoke. He set the document on the table, his eyes softening. Then may I ask, does cruelty have a place, madam? Her composure faltered, if only for a heartbeat. It is familiar. He took a slow step forward, his voice quiet. Familiarity is a poor substitute for peace. She turned away, walking toward the window where frost had begun to bloom along the panes. Peace is not permitted to women who have disappointed their husbands. His reply was almost a whisper. Then perhaps your husband does not understand the measure of disappointment. She turned sharply, her breath caught between indignation and pain. You presume too much, my lord? He bowed his head. Forgive me. I presume only what I see, a woman burdened with grace and a silence that was never her choice. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then she said quietly, I would ask you to leave. He did not argue. But before he left, he placed a gloved hand upon the folded paper on the table and said, If ever the silence becomes too heavy to bear, remember there is someone who does not mistake quiet for contentment. When he was gone, she stood there trembling, not from fear but from the unbearable warmth of being understood. By the following week, gossip reached the village. A coachman had seen the Duke's horse at her gate, a maid claimed she'd overheard laughter through the parlor door. The stories grew like ivy, each retelling more poisonous than the last. Her husband returned sooner than expected. That night, during dinner, his civility was a mask too thin to hide the venom beneath. I've heard remarkable things, he said, carving his meat with casual precision. About embroidery of all things. You've taken quite the interest in it lately. Her fork stilled. I've always done embroidery. Yes, but now with such passion, violets, I believe? His smile was all teeth. A curious choice. Symbol of modesty, isn't it? The room seemed to tighten around her. She forced a faint smile. Perhaps that is why I chose it. He leaned back, satisfied by her restraint. How noble. Later, when he retired, she stood before the fire, her hands shaking. The flames caught her reflection in the glass, a woman who had spent years learning how not to weep. She took out the hidden handkerchief from her book and held it over the fire. For a moment, she meant to burn it, to erase all trace of danger. Yet she could not. Instead, she folded it once more and pressed it against her heart. The narrator's voice might have murmured then, with the wisdom of time, love, when forbidden, does not vanish. It conceals itself within gestures, a folded cloth, a look across the room, a silence shared. The next morning, her husband departed again, leaving her with a kiss that did not reach her skin. The carriage wheels groaned against the gravel, the sound fading into distance. She watched from the window, knowing that for the first time in years, she wished him never to return. And as the day waned, a shadow fell across the snow once more, a rider approaching, the Duke's coat dark against the pale horizon. Her heart betrayed her by quickening. Yet she did not move to meet him. She only stood there, hand pressed to the cold glass, as if the barrier could somehow protect her from what she both feared and longed for. By nightfall, another parcel was found at her door. No embroidery this time, no words. Only a single white rose wrapped in linen, pure, fragile, and alive. She closed her eyes, whispering to the quiet room, this must end. But in her voice there was no conviction, only the trembling edge of hope, as dangerous as sin. Rain had come with the night, soft at first, then relentless. A steady rhythm against the glass that filled the manor's hollow corridors with a sound both soothing and mournful. The world beyond the windows had dissolved into a blur of gray and silver, the trees bending under the wind. Inside, the fire burned low, its light flickering across her pale hands as she sat alone in the conservatory. The air smelled faintly of damp roses and old books. It had been days since she received the white rose, yet she had not sent word nor returned the token. But tonight, something in her, pride, exhaustion, perhaps longing, had loosened. When the door opened behind her, she did not turn. She knew his footsteps now, slow, deliberate, respectful, as if every approach were a question. You should not be here, she said softly, her reflection in the window trembling from the rain. Perhaps not, came his reply, low and steady. But I feared I had already said too much to remain silent. She turned then. The Duke stood in the doorway, his dark coat soaked through, droplets sliding down his shoulders. He looked both weary and resolute, as if the storm had driven him here not by choice, but by something heavier, a conviction that would not let him rest. "You risk more than reputation by coming," she said, rising slowly. "If my husband—" "Your husband is in London," he interrupted gently, "and the world already believes what it wishes." There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet sorrow. He stepped closer, his boots leaving faint marks on the marble floor. "I did not send the rose to offend you. I sent it because I could not bear the thought that you might believe yourself unloved by the world." Her voice trembled despite her effort to still it. "Love is not a word that belongs to me anymore, my lord. It has been twisted into something I can neither trust nor crave." He studied her face, the faint shadows under her eyes, the defiance that had kept her alive. "And yet, it is the one word that should have always belonged to you." Silence stretched between them. The rain outside grew heavier, a veil between their world and the rest of creation. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "Do you think it is easy for me to be pitied by a man who does not know my life? You see only fragments, my lord, an insult at a ball, a cruel smile at supper. But you do not see the years between those moments." "Then show me," he said simply. Her composure faltered. She moved toward the small table by the window, her hand brushing over a teacup gone cold. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years of sharing a house without a home. 5 years of words that cut without leaving scars visible enough for sympathy. He never struck me, no, he is too proud for that. But he would rather let the world think me foolish than let me forget my place. Her voice thickened, breaking for the first time. "I once believed endurance was a virtue. That if I were good, patient, obedient, God himself would reward me with peace. But peace never came. Only silence, and I learned to live inside it." He stepped closer, the firelight glinting faintly against the wet fabric of his coat. "And in all that time, no one offered you kindness?" She gave a faint, bitter laugh. "Kindness invites suspicion. Every gesture becomes a weapon in disguise." The Duke's expression softened. "Then may I be forgiven for wishing I had met you before such suspicion took root?" Her breath caught. The words were spoken so quietly that they seemed to echo louder than thunder. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not speak as if—" "As if what?" he asked, his voice low. "As if I have not thought of you since that night at the ball? As if your silence has not haunted every hour I pretend to work, every mile I ride to forget?" The storm answered in his place, lightning flashing against the windows. She turned away, her hands trembling against the edge of the table. "You cannot say such things. Not to me." "Why?" he asked, stepping forward until his reflection joined hers in the glass. "Because it is forbidden? Because it is honest?" She closed her eyes. "Because honesty costs too much. You may bear whispers and gossip. I would bear ruin." He looked down, his jaw tightening. "Then ruin me instead." She turned to face him, startled. His eyes, steady, unflinching, met hers, and for the first time she saw not pity but something far deeper. "Do you even understand what you are saying?" she asked. "I do," he said. "I have lived long enough among men who pretend affection and women who barter it. You are the first I have met who endures it with dignity. If the price of decency is loneliness, then I would pay it beside you." Her throat constricted, her defenses faltering under the quiet conviction in his words. The firelight caught her face, softening her expression. For a moment she allowed herself to look at him, really look. His hair damp from the rain, his eyes weary yet alive with something unguarded. She whispered, "You should leave before I forget what must be done." He nodded once, though he did not move immediately. "You may forget, madam, but I will not." His gaze fell briefly to the floor before meeting hers again. "Forgive me for intruding on your peace. I see now you guard it more fiercely than happiness." He turned to go, his footsteps slow, echoing in the dim room. But before he reached the door she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are wrong." He stopped. She looked down at the white rose resting on the table, petals still fresh despite the passing days. "I do not guard peace. I guard the remains of myself." The Duke's hand tightened on the doorframe, his shoulders tense. "Then perhaps it is time someone else stood guard for you." Neither moved for several seconds. The only sound was the rain, steady and eternal. When he finally left, she stood motionless, staring at the place where he had been. The air still carried the faint scent of cedar and rain. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her chest as if trying to still the chaos inside. On the table, the rose seemed almost luminous in the firelight. She reached for it, fingertips brushing its stem, and whispered, "What have you done to me?" The narrator's voice, old and sorrowful, would have spoken then. In every life there comes a moment when silence no longer protects, when the heart, having been starved too long, mistakes danger for deliverance. She blew out the lamp, leaving only the faint glow of the fire. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, and through the window's reflection she thought she saw a shadow still standing near the gate, motionless, waiting. Whether real or imagined she did not know. But she knew this: the world would no longer be the same when morning came. The night of the winter charity gala arrived cloaked in thunder and rain, as though the heavens themselves were divided between cleansing and judgment. The manor glowed with a deceptive warmth, every chandelier burning with light, every guest adorned in the sheen of respectability that hid decay beneath. She stood before her mirror, pale and still, her gown the color of moonlight. The maid's hands trembled as she fastened the last clasp at her back. Even the servants had heard the whispers, that tonight would decide her fate. Her husband had been in high spirits all day, the cruel kind of cheer that preceded humiliation. Rumors had reached his ears, carried by those who thrived on ruin. He planned to make a spectacle of forgiveness, to parade his dominance disguised as mercy. And she, as ever, was expected to smile. By the time the guests arrived, the house rang with laughter that clanged like distant bells. The scent of roses and brandy mingled in the air, thick and oppressive. She moved through the crowd like a ghost among the living, nodding, smiling, enduring. Each polite exchange was a test of endurance. Every whispered name, the Duke's among them, pressed upon her chest like the tightening of a corset. Her husband approached her then, his glass raised, his grin practiced. "My dear," he said loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I trust you will greet our guests properly tonight. No more hiding in corners, it invites unfortunate speculation." The guests laughed softly, the way people do when cruelty is wrapped in charm. She inclined her head, her voice steady. "As you wish." The narrator might have said, "Grace under cruelty is the purest defiance." The orchestra struck a waltz, and her husband extended his hand. She took it, her heart cold, her movements flawless. As they turned, she saw the doors open, and the Duke enter. He was drenched from rain, his dark coat glistening, his expression composed but grave. The moment their eyes met, her breath faltered. His presence alone silenced the air between them. Her husband noticed. He always did. Leaning closer, he whispered through his smile, "You will write to him tonight. A letter, denouncing his attention. You will thank him for his civility and remind him of your vows. I will dictate it myself." She met his eyes, her own calm and unreadable. "And if I refuse?" He smiled wider. "Then your name will not survive the week." The music swelled, drowning the last of their words. Around them, people danced, oblivious to the quiet war being fought in plain sight. When the song ended, she curtsied, stepped away and left the floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Later, she found herself alone in the study, a single candle burning. The storm outside was fierce now, branches clawing at the windows. She sat at the desk, pen in hand, the paper before her blank. Every word she might write would be a weapon against herself. She dipped the pen, but her hand would not move. Then the door opened. He stood there, the Duke, rain still streaking his coat, his presence filling the room with something raw and real. "You should not have come," she whispered. "Then tell me to leave," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Tell me and I will obey." She looked up at him, her resolve trembling. "You know I cannot." "Then I will stay." Lightning flared, illuminating his face. The weariness, the restraint, the ache of someone who had lived too long without peace. He moved no closer, as though distance itself were a form of reverence. He said, "I did not come to ruin you. I came because I could not bear to see you surrender to a life that has already stolen enough from you." Her voice broke. "You speak as if I have a choice. You speak as though freedom were offered to women like me." "I offer nothing," he said. "Only truth. You are more than what the world allows you to be. If I thought leaving would save your dignity, I would go this instant, but I believe silence would be the greater sin." She rose from her chair, trembling. "Do you think words will save me, my lord? That declarations make saints of sinners?" He shook his head, stepping forward at last, his eyes fixed on hers. "No. But I would rather bear scandal than silence your name in my heart." Her breath caught. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The storm, the candle, the beating of two hearts too long restrained. "You cannot mean that," she whispered. "I have meant little else these 5 years," he said softly. "I have seen the hollow men of this world, all pride, no soul, and I have envied none of them. But you," his voice faltered, "you have endured with grace. You have lived without warmth, yet still you glow. If that is sin, then let me be damned beside you." Tears rose unbidden and she turned away, her hand over her mouth. He stepped closer, not touching her, not daring to, and said almost in prayer, "Let the world speak what it will. Let it ruin my name, strip me of title, of comfort. I will not let them take your spirit too." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere in the house, laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of the life they both stood apart from. She turned to him then, her eyes fierce through tears. "Do you realize what you ask of me? To stand against a world that would sooner destroy me than forgive me?" "Yes," he said. "And I ask it not for myself, but for the part of you that still dares to hope." Her voice broke into a whisper. "And what if hope kills me?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Then I shall envy death." Outside, thunder rolled, a deep, ancient sound that seemed to shake the room. And for one suspended moment, time held its breath. She reached out, not for embrace but for understanding, and her fingers brushed his hand. It was not passion that passed between them, but peace, a fragile, devastating peace that neither had known in years. The door burst open. Her husband stood there, face white with rage. "So," he said quietly, "it is true." The Duke released her hand, straightening, every inch the man of honor even in disgrace. "Get out," her husband hissed. But the Duke did not move. His voice was calm. "I will go. But you will not speak to her again as you did tonight." Her husband's laugh was cruel. "You forget your place. And you forget your humanity," the Duke said. "A pity? It once might have suited you." He turned to her then, eyes soft. "Do not let him decide the rest of your story." He left without another word. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Her husband's fury burned like a brand in the dark, but for the first time she felt no fear. Only the faint echo of a truth that could no longer be buried. The narrator's voice, low and steady, would have said, and thus, under the gaze of scandal and storm, two hearts bound by silence broke their chains, not through defiance but through the courage to feel. Spring arrived with hesitant grace, as though London itself had grown weary of cruelty. The snow had melted into mud and memory, and the air carried the scent of rain and rebirth. Months had passed since that storm, the night her world cracked open, and yet its echo still lingered in every glance, every whispered name spoken behind gloved hands. The scandal had spread with the precision of poison. Her husband's downfall came quietly, like rot beneath polished wood. The same men who once toasted him now turned away, whispering of debts, of investments gone sour, of favors unpaid. By the time the truth reached her, he had already fled, escaping creditors and disgrace, leaving only a letter and a house stripped of servants. In his farewell, he wrote not of regret but of accusation, blaming her for the ruin he had long sown himself. She read it once, then fed it to the fire. Watching the paper curl and blacken, she felt neither triumph nor grief, only release. The walls that had once held her prisoner now stood hollow and echoing, as if the house itself had exhaled at last. Society's judgment came swiftly. Invitations ceased. The faces that once smiled now turned away. She was the fallen woman, the wife abandoned, the whisper in every salon. Yet, amid ruin there was an odd clarity. For the first time her life belonged to no one but herself. The old narrator's voice would have said, "Freedom is seldom graceful when it first arrives. It stumbles, it weeps, it wonders if it deserves to stand." She sold what remained of the estate and withdrew to her late father's countryside property, a modest manor surrounded by green hills and quiet skies. The villagers spoke kindly but distantly, the way one speaks to a ghost who chooses not to haunt. In solitude she found purpose. She tended her garden, mended the old chapel roof, and paid fair wages to those who worked her fields. Slowly, the rhythm of honest labor began to mend what pride and pretense had broken. And yet, some nights, she would wake from dreams of rain and candlelight, her hand reaching for a presence that no longer stood beside her. The Duke had vanished from public life after that night. Rumors said he had resigned his post, others that he had gone abroad once more. She told herself it was better so, that his silence was mercy, not abandonment. It was on a spring evening that everything changed. The day had been long, the sky a soft wash of gold. She was walking through her garden, the hem of her gown brushing new lavender, when she heard the distant rumble of wheels on the old gravel road. A carriage was approaching, a dark one, unmarked, drawn by two gray horses. Her heart tightened, foolishly hopeful, and she forced herself to turn away. When the carriage stopped, she did not look up until she heard her name spoken, quietly as one speaks a prayer that might break if uttered too loudly. She turned. He stood before her, older somehow, though it had been only months. The Duke, no longer adorned in finery or title, dressed plainly, his coat dusty from travel. But his eyes, they had not changed. The same deep steadiness, the same gravity that had once seen straight through the armor she'd built around herself. "Forgive my intrusion," he said softly. "I did not wish to disturb your peace." "You never did," she replied. Her voice was calm, though her hands trembled faintly at her sides. "You shouldn't have come." "Then tell me to go," he said just as he had once before. She smiled faintly. "I no longer tell anyone what they should do." He stepped closer, stopping only when propriety demanded he could come no nearer. "I heard of his flight," he said, his tone gentle but edged with sorrow. "Of what he left behind." "I am not his ruin," she said. "I know," he replied. "You were his mirror, and he could not bear to see himself." The words settled between them like truth long overdue. She looked away, her voice barely above the wind. "The world will never forgive either of us." "Then let the world keep its forgiveness," he said. "I have no use for it." The evening light deepened, gold turning to amber, the first stars trembling faintly above the horizon. She could hear her own heart again, unhurried yet alive. He continued, his voice low. "I left everything, title, estate, parliament. I thought perhaps in absence I might find peace. But peace is not found in places, it's found in what we dare to keep. And I could not leave you to the mercy of a world that mistook your silence for surrender." She looked at him then, truly looked. The lines around his eyes spoke of years spent choosing conscience over comfort. He had carried his honor like a wound, and yet here he stood, unashamed. "You came for me," she whispered. He nodded once. "Not to rescue you. You've never needed rescuing. I came to ask if there is still room in your life for someone who loves you without demand." Her breath caught, her composure wavering. "And if I say no?" "Then I will thank you for letting me see you happy," he said simply. "And I will go." The simplicity of it undid her. No vows, no promises of redemption, just truth, offered without expectation. The garden fell into silence save for the faint rustle of leaves. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them until only a breath remained. "I have been so afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that if I ever reached for happiness again, the world would tear it from me." He lifted his gaze to hers. "Let it try." She laughed softly, though tears gleamed in her eyes. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," he said. "But it is right." The church bells from the village began to ring then, carried faintly by the wind. They stood in the garden, the scent of lavender rising around them, the past and future suspended in the same fragile heartbeat. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Then stay." He exhaled, a sound between relief and wonder. "For a night?" "For as long as peace allows," she said. And with that, the distance of years dissolved. He reached for her hand, not to claim it, but to hold it, as though acknowledging all they had survived to reach this moment. The narrator's final words would have come softly, reverent and sure. It was not scandal that defined her, nor ruin that marked him. It was courage, the quiet, unyielding courage to love in a world that mistook love for defiance. As twilight deepened, they stood together beneath the first stars, neither saints nor sinners, just two souls who had endured the winter and found at last the mercy of spring.